על הניסים ועל הפורקן ועל הגבורות ועל התשובות ועל המלחמות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
In terms of Jewish religious holidays, Chanukah is unique. It is not based on anything from the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, although there were rabbis 1,000 years ago who felt that the book of Daniel predicted it. There's a scant reference in the Talmud for Hanukkah, and that's in the tractate for Shabbat, the Sabbath. But it seems to be about the kind of oil to be used in the Chanukiah, which is the proper name of a Hanukkah menorah, and where to place it in the window. For the next 30 minutes, with the help of my friend and cantorial soloist Joan Wolf, we will be exploring the historical, political, cultural, and even gustatory elements of Hanukkah. To get us in the right mood, Joan will sing a song about a dreidel, a four-sided top with Hebrew letters on each side. The word for the spinning top in Hebrew is sevivon. The lyrics, sevivon, sof, 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 literally mean top, spin, 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 followed by the words Chanukah hu chag tov. Chanukah is a good holiday.
סביבון סוף סוף סוף, חנוכה הוא חג טוב, חנוכה הוא חג טוב, סביבון סוף סוף סוף, חג שמחה הוא עלם, נס גדול היה שם, נס גדול היה שם, חג שמחה הוא לעם, סביבון סוף סוף סוף, חנוכה הוא חג טוב, חנוכה הוא חג טוב, סביבון סוף סוף סוף, סביבון סוף סוף סוף, סביבון סוף סוף סוף, סביבון סוף סוף סוף.
The tradition is you put the candles in from right to left for the nights of Hanukkah. So this is for the first night, this is the second night. First time I was ever on television, I was 10 years old. There's a show called the Jewish Community Hour, which was on WTOP TV, which is what Channel 9 was called those days. I was 10, my voice had not changed, and I got to do the candle lighting blessings. And I had all of the candles lit, and as I went to put the shamash back in its holder, my finger got into the fourth candle and I burned it. Yes, my first appearance on television. Let's hope we do not repeat that tonight. So this is a shamash. It's this servant candle to the others. Then you light them from the newest to the older one. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavotenu vayamim ha'hem b'zman hazeh. By the way, it's only the first night of Hanukkah when you do Shehechianu. Shehechianu is only done for a new event. Now that we've lit the Chanukiah, which is what technically a Hanukkah menorah is called, a Chanukiah, because it's got 9 candles. A menorah only has 7. So what is Hanukkah? It's not referenced in the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, although there are some who say it's alluded to in the book of Daniel with the war of the East and the West, but that's a bit of a stretch. What we know about Hanukkah comes from extra-biblical sources. The Talmud has basically 8 lines of text, and those are all in the tractate called Shabbat. I'll read you a little bit of it. It says, what is Hanukkah? The rabbis have expounded, beginning with the 25th of Kislev, 8 days of Hanukkah are observed, during which no eulogies are delivered, nor is fasting permitted. For when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the holy oils used for the menorah in the temple. And when the Hashmonean house prevailed and vanquished them, they searched and found only one remaining jar of oil within the Kohen Gadol's seal. Although it contained only enough oil to burn for 1 day, a miracle occurred, and the oil burned for 8 days. A year later, the rabbis designated these days as Yamim Tovim, on which praise and thanksgiving were to be said. That's all it says. There's discussion of who lights the candles, how many Chanukiot you have in the house, where you place it, but in terms of the historicity, that's all we have, the miracle. The rabbis of the Talmud did not even talk about the conquest of the Greeks who had controlled our land. Probably was a political decision that they left it out, because after actually the Hashmonean dynasty that descended from Mattathias, what they did was not exactly according to Jewish thought. They merged the priesthood with the kinghood. That didn't play well, certainly with the rabbis of the Talmud. What we do know about the history comes from actually Christian literature, or even Apocrypha, the first and second books of Maccabees, which is in the Christian Bible. And there we have the narrative about Judah the Hammer, the Maccabee. Oh, by the way, it may be Midrash, but I want to share it with you. Maccabee, I was taught, could be an acronym for Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods, Adonai. But Judah the Hammer, their conquest with superior military strength was amazing. The Greeks were ousted, their pagan relics and practices removed from the temple in Jerusalem, and Judaism is restored, at least under the Hashmonean dynasty, until the Romans come and conquer the Promised Land. Josephus is our last source. He's a chronicler of life in the Promised Land in the first century of the Common Era. He makes reference to the practice of Chanukah in his book of Jewish Antiquities. He talks about what is already in Maccabees 1 and 2. He says that Judea celebrated it for 8 days, and he was the one who named it the Festival of Lights. In Maccabees, it's called Chanukah, dedication. So that is the historical basis of Chanukah, and eventually the military and the oil miracle were combined, and that's how we celebrate Chanukah today.
Rock of ages, let our song praise thy saving power. Thou amidst the raging foes wast our sheltering tower. Furious they assailed us, but thine arm availed us, and thy word broke their sword when our own strength failed us, and thy word broke their sword when our own strength failed us. Ma'oz sur Yeshuati, lechana el shabeach. Tikon betefilati, v'sham toda nizabeach. Le'et tachin matbeach, mitzar hamnabeach. Az egmor beshir mizmor, Chanukat hamizbeach. Az egmor beshir mizmor, Chanukat hamizbeach.
In the Talmud, there's a discussion between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai on how you light the candles for Chanukah. Hillel said you light one night the first candle, second night the second, and all the way up to 8. You build from 1 to 8. That was the decision of the house of Hillel. Shammai, on the other hand, said you start with 8 and you diminish them one by one. And his argument was, at Sukkot, you diminish the number of animal sacrifices by 1 over the days of Sukkot. This may be the first link we have between Hanukkah and Sukkot. There are other rabbis and other authors of Jewish antiquities that discuss the fact that when the Romans prohibited us from doing any Torah celebration, we found other ways to do it. And one of the ways was to mask Sukkot as Chanukah. So there is a direct connect between Sukkot, which is 7 days, plus Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day, and Hanukkah, which is 8 days long.
Oy Chanukah, Ayontif, Ashener, Alusteker, Afrelecher, Nito noch a Zener, alle Nacht in Redlach spielen mir, so de Chesse Latkis essen mir. Geschwinde sind Kinder, die Chanukah Lichtelechon. Soll jeder besonder besingen dem Wunder und tanzen fröhlich in Korn. Soll jeder besonder besingen dem Wunder und tanzen fröhlich in Korn. Oh Hanukkah, come light the menorah. Let's have a party, we'll all dance the hora. Gather round the table, we'll give you a treat. Sevivon to play with and latkes to eat. And while we are playing, the candles are burning low. One for each night, they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. One for each night, they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Oh Hanukkah, a time to remember, a joyful, jolly holiday that comes in December. Every night for 8 days, dreidels will spin, crispy little latkes, tasteful and thin, and nightly, so brightly, the candles of Hanukkah glow. One for each night, they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. One for each night, they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago.
So let's discuss the origin of the dreidel, this four-sided top, called dreidel in Yiddish and sevivon in Hebrew, is a device used in a gambling game played during Hanukkah, usually by children. On its successive surfaces, there are 4 Hebrew letters: the Nun, the Gimel, the Hey, and the Shin. And when you play the game, the Nun, you don't do anything. Gimel, you take all. Hey, you take half of the money or chocolate coins. Shin, you put another coin in the center. There are many legends about the origin of the dreidel. According to one source, who was played over 2,000 years ago at the time of Antiochus, each of the Hebrew letters stood for an enemy of Israel. The Nun, Nebuchadnezzar, which is Babylon. The Gimel, Gog, which represented Greece. The Hey stood for Haman, and the Shin stood for Sair, Rome. Another legend has it that the dreidel was used to teach Torah at a time of Antiochus when it was forbidden. That if anyone saw anyone spinning a dreidel, they would think they were simply gambling. In truth, nobody knows the origin of the dreidel. The word dreidel is from the German drehen, which means to spin. And one could argue that the Jewish use of the dreidel for Hanukkah may be less than 300 years old. We are told that the Hebrew letters are an abbreviation of the phrase, let me get it oriented, Nes, Gadol, Haya, Sham. A great miracle happened there. Although in Israel, it's Nes Gadol Haya Po, a great miracle happened here. But maybe it's really, if it's from the German, the Nun, Nicht, which means you do nothing, Ganza, you take all, Halb, you take half, and Shtetl Ein, you put in. Whether the dreidel is ancient or relatively modern, it's as iconic to Hanukkah as the Chanukiah and potato latkes.
I have a little dreidel, I made it out of clay, and when it's dry and ready, oh dreidel I shall play. Oh dreidel, 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 I made you out of wood, and when you are all ready, I'll play you if I could. It has a lovely body with legs so short and thin, and when it gets all tired, it drops and then I win. Oh dreidel, 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 I made you out of glass, and when you are all ready, I'll play you on the grass. My dreidel is so playful, it loves to dance and spin, a happy game of dreidel Come play now, let's begin. Oh, dreidel, 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 I made you out of gold, and when you are all ready, I'll play you in the cold.
We're not the only ones who had a spinning top. Matter of fact, it was documented in the United Kingdom in the 16th century of the Common Era. And by the time, there were no Jews in England at the time. They were often used for Christians at Christmas as a gambling game called totem, or even teetotum, based on the Latin word for all. And even their tops had letters on each side. T for toto, take all, H for half, P for put, and N for do nothing. And those rules seem amazingly similar to the Jewish version. And I bet if we search, we could find dreidel kind of games in all other cultures.
Chanukah linda está aquí, 8 candelas para mí. Chanukah linda está aquí, 8 candelas para mí. Oh, una candelica, 2 candelicas, 3 candelicas, 4 candelicas, 5 candelicas, 6 candelicas, 7 candelicas, 8 candelas para mí. The festival of lights, celebration every year. In each window on the street, we love and Chanukah is here. Oh, una candelicas, 2 candelicas, 3 candelicas, 4 candelicas, 5 candelicas, 6 candelicas, 7 candelicas, 8 candelas para mí. Muchas fiestas vou fazer, con alegrías y placer. Muchas fiestas yo fazer, con alegrías y placer. Oh, una candelicas, 2 candelicas, 3 candelicas, 4 candelicas, 5 candelicas, 6 candelicas, 7 candelicas, 8 candelas para mí.
We've talked about things that are important for Hanukkah, like the Chanukah, the 9 candlestick candelabrum, which is different from a menorah, which only has 7. We've talked about the dreidel. Now we get to talk about what's really Jewish, food. In the United States and in the West, we eat latkes. And I really think that comes out of the German or Middle European tradition in an area with a lot of potatoes. I don't know how you grew up, but I grew up with a 4-sided potato shredder. And I used to help my grandmother make latkes, and it doesn't count unless you get some of the skin and fingernails in the latkes. It just seemed to come with it. Latkes made in a food processor just don't have the same texture. The reason a little onion, a little schmaltz put in, and we fry this in oil because oil is the symbol for the holiday, that cruise of oil that lasted 8 days. Well, apparently in Israel, they didn't have a lot of potatoes, but what they did have was wheat. So in Israel, instead of latkes, they eat jelly donuts called sufganiyot. They're powdered donuts that are filled with jelly, and those two are prepared in oil. And that's how they celebrate the holiday of the oil. So those of us from Middle Europe have latkes, and those in Israel have jelly donuts, sufganiyot.
מי ימלל גבורות ישראל אותן מי ימנה הן בכל דור יקום הגיבור גואל העם מי ימלל גבורות ישראל אותן מי ימנה הן בכל דור יקום הגיבור גואל העם שמע בימים ההם הזמן הזה מכבי מושיע ובודה ובימינו כל העם ישראל יתאחד יקום להיגאל. Who can retell the things that befell us? Who can count them? In every age a hero or sage came to our aid. Who can retell the things that befell us? Who can count them? In every age a hero or sage came to our aid. Hark! In days of yore in Israel's ancient land, brave Maccabeus led the faithful band. But now all Israel as a one arise, redeem itself through deed and sacrifice. Who can retell the things that befell us? Who can count them? In every age a hero or sage came to our aid.
At this time, I'd like to look at all the historical pieces and see how they fit together that ultimately lead to Chanukah. We'll start with the menorah itself. Why is that such an important element? Probably because it was a direct instruction from God to Moses as the children of Israel left Egypt and were crossing the wilderness. God sent instructions on building a candelabrum that held 7 points of light, 3 on the left, 3 on the right, 1 in the middle. And this was constructed by Bezalel and the other craftsmen and carried through the wilderness. And whenever the children of Israel encamped, they had the menorah with them. And eventually, it found its way into the Temple of Solomon. Solomon was the last king to hold together the northern and southern kingdoms. This is roughly around the year 950 before the Common Era. Solomon being the third king of Israel, the first Saul, second David. Solomon builds the temple. After the death of Solomon, the kingdom splits, northern and southern kingdom. So right now we've got the issue of the menorah, why it's important and why it is carried, and the menorah itself becomes a symbol of the Jewish people. In fact, later on, with the fall of the Second Temple, there's an arch in Rome, the Arch of Titus, that shows the desecration of the Second Temple. And the symbol that is most noticeable in the Arch of Titus is the menorah, the 7-candlestick menorah, although they didn't use candles. That's the menorah part of the story. Now we get to the historical. Northern Kingdom falls in the year 722 before the Common Era by the Assyrians. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel disappear. In 586, the southern kingdom is destroyed by the Babylonians. And the rich and the smart and the people of power are marched out of the Holy Land and taken to Babylonia. We stay in Babylonia for roughly 60 years until Cyrus the Great of Persia conquers the Babylonian Empire and eventually lets the Jews, as they're now called, return to the Promised Land. What happens to the kingship? Well, there isn't one. We're under Persian control. While that's going on, the Greek Empire builds. Alexander the Great conquers Asia Minor, conquers the Mediterranean, and including the Holy Land. At this point, what I find interesting is there was a beautiful merger, actually, of the Greek culture and the Hebrew culture. The Greek with the beauty and the aesthetics, and the Hebrew with history and law. And there were Hellenized Hebrews in Israel who welcomed the Greeks. Alexander the Great dies. There's a war among his generals, and the one who turns out to be the power player is Seleucus. And from Seleucus, we have the Seleucid dynasty. That's where the word Seleucid comes from, descendants of Seleucus. Eventually, along that line, there is a character by the name of Antiochus or Antiochus. I've seen and heard both pronunciations. Antiochus IV prohibits Jewish practice in Israel. In fact, takes over the temple and dedicates it to Zeus and other alien gods, and their worship is for foreign gods, at least foreign from the perspective of the Jewish people. I'm sure there were multiple guerrilla groups trying to overthrow the Greeks, but the one that survives are the Hashmoneans, or the Hashmoneans, giving it an American accent. Mattathias and his 5 sons, probably the best known of them is Judah, called Judah Maccabee, or Judah the Hammer, lead a revolt against the Greeks, and they succeed. They overthrow the Seleucids, which is amazing because it's a band of underpaid, underprepared warriors, and they throw over what was then the most powerful army in the area. Roughly in the year 164 before the Common Era, we take back the temple. Judah Maccabee and his brothers and his followers take out the statues of Zeus and the other profanations to restore the temple to its former glory, the temple that Solomon built. Now, this is where the menorah and the temple come back together. The story of Judah Maccabee is really from the book of Maccabees. The story of the oil that lasts 8 days comes from the Talmud. They're not merged. So the story has it according to Talmud. There was just enough oil to light the lamps for one day, which was a problem because it took 8 days to process olives into pure olive oil. Yet that one cruse of oil lasted for 8 days until the new olive oil was ready. And that becomes the miracle of Chanukah. And as I mentioned earlier, it was Josephus who took the word Chanukah, which is what the book of Maccabees called a dedication, and added Festival of Lights, which is the name that prevails to this day.
Light one candle for the Maccabee children, with thanks that their light didn't die. Light one candle for the pain they endured when their right to exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. But light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our tears. Light one candle for the strength that we need to never become our own foe. And light one candle for those who are suffering pain we learned so long ago. Light one candle for all we believe in, that anger not tear us apart. And light one candle to find us together with peace as the song in our hearts. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our tears. What is the memory that's valued so highly that we keep it alive in that flame? What's the commitment to those who have died that we cry out they've not died in vain? We have come this far always believing that justice would somehow prevail. This is the burden, and this is the promise, and this is why we will not fail. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our tears. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our tears.
Modern practice of Hanukkah not only includes the 8 nights of candles and singing and latkes, celebration, but in the services of the synagogue, they add what's called Hallel, praises of God from the book of Psalms. And these are sung as part of the Hanukkah celebration in synagogues. So you have the home celebration with the menorah and the dreidel and the food in the synagogue with prayers and Hallel. And all of this comes together for Hanukkah. Part of that is also on Hanisim, on the miracles. And this is where we will end our discussion of the history of Hanukkah and its celebration today.
על הניסים ועל הפורקן ועל הגבורות ועל התשובות ועל המלחמות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. על הניסים הניסים ועל הפורקן ועל הגבורות ועל התשובות ועל המלחמות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. על הניסים ועל הפורקן ועל התשובות ועל הגבורות ועל המלחמות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.